But because fear had replaced it, every stone wall inside the royal capital carried the weight of obedience. Every servant walked with lowered eyes. Every noble bowed, not out of respect, but survival. And above them all sat the king, the man people call the Iron Wolf, a ruler so feared that neighboring kingdoms ended wars before his armies even crossed the border. A king who had executed traitors without trial, banished blood relatives without hesitation, and rejected every noblewoman presented before him like they were beneath his attention. No queen, no children, no softness, only power. The royal court whispered that he was born without a heart. Others claimed he once loved someone long ago, and whatever happened afterward turned him into something colder than death itself. But nobody dared ask him, because the last man who questioned the king's past disappeared before sunrise. And in a kingdom built on silence, rumors became ghosts. The palace itself felt less like a home, and more like a fortress carved from intimidation. Towering black pillars lined the throne hall. Silver banners hung like funeral cloth from the ceilings. Even the air inside carried tension so thick it suffocated conversation. Servants moved quickly, quietly, invisible. That was the rule. A servant's existence mattered only when something needed cleaning. And among those forgotten faces was her, the girl nobody noticed. She woke before dawn, every morning to scrub marble floors already cleaner than mirrors. She carried boiling water through endless corridors until her hands blistered raw. She bowed to nobles who never learned her name. And somehow, she never complained. Not once. The older servants often watched her in confusion. Because palace workers usually hardened over time, cruelty inside the castle infected everyone eventually. But not her. Even after punishment, even after exhaustion, even after days without proper food, she still helped others, still shared scraps of bread, still comforted frightened kitchen boys, still smiled softly at people who ignored her existence. It didn't make sense, especially because there was always something strangely distant about her. Not arrogance, not pride, something else, like she didn't fully belong among the servants. Sometimes the older maids caught her staring out the palace windows toward the mountains beyond the kingdom borders, not casually, longingly, as if she remembered something the rest of them had forgotten. And whenever someone asked where she came from, the girl would simply smile and lower her eyes. I don't remember much. A lie. A gentle one. But a lie all the same. That same winter, the kingdom prepared for another royal selection banquet. Another parade of noble daughters. Another desperate attempt by aristocratic families to marry into the throne. The palace transformed overnight. Golden chandeliers illuminated the grand hall. Musicians rehearsed until midnight. Perfume soaked the corridors so heavily they almost masked the smell of fear beneath them. Because everyone knew how these banquets ended. Humiliation. The king never chose anyone. He barely even looked at them. One noblewoman had once spent 6 hours preparing a custom gown embroidered with real silver thread, and the king dismissed her with a single glance. Another tried to impress him through political strategy. He left before she finished speaking. The rejection destroyed families. Destroyed alliances, but still, they kept trying, because power made people foolish and desperate. Meanwhile, deep beneath the palace banquet hall, the servant girl knelt alone beside a basin of freezing water, washing blood from embroidered tablecloths. Her fingers trembled from cold. The other servants had already gone upstairs to continue preparations, but she remained behind, finishing the work nobody else wanted. Quiet, unnoticed, until footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy footsteps, measured, royal guards. The girl immediately lowered her head. Nobody important ever came below the servant quarters unless something had gone wrong. The footsteps stopped. Silence followed. Then, lift your head. A male voice. Cold, controlled. The girl froze instantly. Every servant in the kingdom recognized that voice. The king. Her breathing caught in her throat. Slowly, carefully, she obeyed, and for the first time, the ruler of the kingdom truly looked at her. Not through her. At her. The room suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. His presence consumed everything around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed entirely in black royal armor despite the banquet preparations above. His face carried the kind of sharpness sculptors failed to recreate in statues. Not beautiful in a warm way. Beautiful in a dangerous way. Like a sword polished moments before execution. But it was his eyes that terrified people most. Empty. Not lifeless. Worse. Controlled. As though every human emotion had been locked behind iron gates years ago. Those eyes studied her now with unsettling stillness. The servant girl immediately lowered her gaze again. "I apologize if I caused offense, Your Majesty." The king didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer. One step. That was all it took for the air to tighten around her lungs. "What is your name?" The question surprised her. Kings did not ask servants for names. Not unless they intended punishment. Lira! Another lie. Or perhaps half of one. Nobody in the palace knew that. But the king noticed something. A pause. Tiny. Almost invisible. Yet his gaze sharpened instantly. Interesting. For the first time in months, something inside him shifted. Not warmth. Not curiosity exactly. But awareness. Because servants feared him in predictable ways. They trembled, avoided eye contact, spoke too quickly. This girl did all those things. And yet something about her felt different. Restrained. As if she was hiding fear beneath discipline instead of helplessness. The king glanced toward the blood-stained cloth in her hands. "You're injured." She looked down. Her knuckles had split open from scrubbing fabric against stone. She quickly hid them behind her sleeves. "It's nothing, Your Majesty." Another strange response. Most servants beg for sympathy when given the opportunity. But she asked for nothing. Wanted nothing. And somehow, that unsettled him more than ambition ever had. Above them, distant music from the ballroom echoed faintly through the ceilings. The banquet was beginning. Another night of fake smiles and political desperation awaited him upstairs. The king should have left immediately. Instead, he remained standing there, watching her, and for reasons he could not explain. He suddenly wanted to know who she really was. Far above the servant corridors, the royal court laughed beneath golden candlelight. Noblewomen adjusted jeweled crowns. Ministers exchanged calculated smiles. Power moved through the ballroom like poison hidden inside perfume. But downstairs, something far more dangerous had quietly begun. Neither the king, nor the servant girl, understood it yet, but fate had already entered the room. And kingdoms had burned for less. The banquet should have ended like every other royal gathering before it, with rejection, with bruised noble pride hidden behind forced smiles, with the king abandoning the ballroom before midnight while musicians continued playing songs nobody was listening to anymore. That was the pattern. Predictable, cold, untouchable. But that night, something shifted, and the entire palace felt it before they understood it. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath oceans of candlelight. Crystal chandeliers reflected gold across polished marble floors while noble families paraded their daughters before the throne like offerings to a god no longer capable of love. Each woman wore wealth stitched into fabric, diamonds, silks, perfumes imported from distant kingdoms. And none of it mattered, because the king sat motionless the entire evening, one hand resting against the arm of his throne, expression unreadable, eyes distant, bored. A duke's daughter recited poetry written specifically for him. The king didn't react. Another offered military insight about border disputes. Silence. A third attempted flirtation through subtle compliments and lowered eyes. Nothing. Hours passed. The court grew restless. Even the musicians sensed the tension tightening inside the room. Because the king was becoming more detached with every passing minute. Not angry. Worse. Absent. As if his mind had wandered somewhere far beyond the ballroom walls, and unknown to everyone surrounding him. It had. Back downstairs, to a servant girl kneeling beside freezing water, to trembling hands hiding split knuckles, to a pause before speaking her name. Tiny details, meaningless details, yet somehow, he remembered all of them. That irritated him more than he cared to admit. "My king!" The voice pulled him back. A noblewoman stood before him now, waiting nervously. Beautiful, elegant, forgettable. The king stared at her for several silent seconds before finally speaking. "You may leave." The words landed like execution. The woman's face paled instantly. Around the ballroom, whispers erupted beneath controlled smiles. Again, another rejection. The woman bowed shakily before retreating into the crowd. humiliation burning visibly across her expression. The king rose from his throne immediately afterward. The entire hall straightened at once. No one stopped him. No one ever did. His black cloak swept across marble floors as royal guards followed several steps behind. And within moments, the Alpha King disappeared from his own banquet. Again. Below the palace, the servant corridors remained alive with chaos. Workers rushed between kitchens carrying silver trays and wine pitchers while head servants barked orders loud enough to cut through stone. "Lira!" She turned instantly. An older maid shoved folded linens into her arms. "The west corridor. Hurry!" "Yes, ma'am." No complaints. No hesitation. Lira lowered her head and moved quickly through the palace halls, balancing stacked fabrics carefully against her chest. Invisible. That was how survival worked inside the castle. Never attract attention. Never speak too much. Never be remembered. And for months, she had succeeded. Until tonight. The west corridor was nearly empty when she arrived. Moonlight spilled through towering windows, painting silver across the floor. For the first time all evening, silence. Lira exhaled slowly. Her body ached from exhaustion. But she welcomed the quiet, because silence meant safety. At least, until footsteps echoed from the opposite end of the corridor. Heavy, measured, instantly recognizable. Her breath caught. The king. Again. Panic flashed through her chest. She immediately stepped aside, lowering her gaze as royal guards approached behind him. Every servant knew the rule. Bow immediately, do not speak, do not look directly at the throneborn. But something happened. Something small. Something stupid. One of the folded linens slipped from her arms. The fabric hit the floor, directly in the king's path. The guards reacted instantly. "She dares!" But before the soldier could finish, the king raised one hand. Silence. Immediate, terrifying silence. Lira quickly dropped to her knees. "I apologize, Your Majesty." Her pulse thundered violently now. She expected punishment, expected humiliation, expected the sharp command all servants feared. Instead, nothing happened. The corridor remained deathly still. Then, "Look at me." Her stomach tightened. Slowly, she lifted her eyes, and immediately regretted it, because the king was already watching her. Not casually, intently, like he was trying to solve something. The moonlight sharpened the angles of his face, casting shadows beneath eyes far too unreadable to belong to any normal man. "You're the girl from below the banquet hall." Not a question, a realization. Lira lowered her gaze again, instantly. "Yes, Your Majesty. You lied earlier." The words froze her blood. Her mind raced violently. Did he know? Impossible. No one could know. Careful. Be careful. "My name is Lira," she answered softly. But not originally. Silence. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Even they looked uncomfortable now, because nobody spoke to the king this honestly, especially not servants. And yet, she had. The king stepped closer. "Where are you from?" Lira hesitated. Too long. Again. And once more. He noticed. A dangerous thing to notice. Because kings survive through instinct. And his instincts were beginning to awaken around her. "I don't remember much," she whispered carefully. There it was again. That sadness. Not rehearsed. Not manipulative. Real. And somehow, that unsettled him more than deception would have. Most people lied to gain advantage. This girl lied like someone protecting pain. The king studied her face in silence. Then his eyes lowered slightly. To her hands. Still bleeding. Still raw from labor. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. A servant beside him suddenly spoke. "Your Majesty, shall we remove her?" Remove. Such a simple palace word. It could mean dismissal. Prison. Execution. Lira's heartbeat nearly stopped. But the king never looked away from her. "No." One word. Cold absolute. The guards immediately lowered their heads. And in that moment, everything changed. Because the king had just done something he never did. He spared attention. Not mercy. Attention. Which was infinitely more dangerous. The next morning, the whispers began. Servants spoke quietly while preparing baths. Kitchen workers exchanged nervous glances over boiling pots. Even guards muttered beneath their breath near courtyard walls. The king spoke to her twice. He stopped the guards himself. Who is she? No servant survives royal attention. Rumors spread through the palace faster than wildfire through dry grass, and every version became more dangerous than the last. Some claimed she enchanted him. Others believed she was a spy planted by enemy kingdoms. A few simply pitied her, because everyone inside the palace understood one truth. The king destroyed everything he focused on. Eventually. But Lira knew none of this. She continued working as usual, scrubbing floors, cleaning chambers, avoiding eye contact, trying desperately to disappear again. Yet slowly, she began noticing things. Guards watching her longer than necessary. Servants falling silent when she entered rooms. The head maid suddenly assigning her tasks closer to royal corridors. And worst of all, that feeling. The unbearable feeling of being observed, even when she was alone. 3 nights later, the king stood silently behind a balcony curtain overlooking the lower palace courtyard. Below him, servants carried water beneath snowfall while torches flickered against stone walls. And there she was again, Lira, helping an older worker lift a bucket too heavy for her frail arms, laughing softly when the woman thanked her. Such a small moment, meaningless. Yet the king remained perfectly still while watching it. Something unfamiliar stirred beneath the armor surrounding his mind. Not desire, not affection, something far more dangerous. Interest. And for the first time in years, the Alpha King realized he was looking forward to seeing someone again. The moment that thought crossed his mind, his expression darkened instantly. Because kings like him did not become curious. Curiosity became weakness. Weakness became ruin. And ruin always began quietly. After that night, the palace stopped feeling safe. Not for her. Not anymore. Because attention inside the royal castle was never harmless. Especially royal attention. And somehow, without understanding how, Lira had become the center of it. The changes began subtly, small enough to dismiss at first. A reassignment here, an unusual order there. The head maid suddenly requesting Lira specifically for upper palace duties, which made no sense. Servants from the lower quarters rarely entered royal corridors unless summoned for punishment or emergency labor. Yet now, her name kept appearing, again and again. Lira, take these records to the king's study. Lira, prepare the western chamber. Lira, you'll serve tonight's private council. The older servants stared at her with growing unease. One woman finally grabbed her wrist near the kitchens. What did you do? Lira blinked in confusion. What? The maid lowered her voice immediately. The king. Even whispering the title sounded dangerous. He keeps requesting servants from your division. A pause. Then, servants connected to you. Fear spread quietly across the woman's face. Not jealousy. Fear. Because everyone understood what happened to people who drifted too close to powerful rulers. They disappeared into politics, into obsession, into destruction. And the cruelest part, sometimes they vanished without ever understanding why. Meanwhile, inside the throne room, the Alpha King sat through military reports he wasn't listening to. Generals argued over border security, ministers debated taxes and grain supply routes. Pointless noise, because part of his attention remained elsewhere. On a servant girl, the realization irritated him deeply. He had fought wars, buried rebellions, survived assassination attempts. Yet somehow, he found himself remembering the exact sound of her voice. Soft, careful, honest in ways that felt almost reckless. It made no sense. And because it made no sense, he couldn't let it go. That was the problem with powerful men. The moment something escaped their understanding, they needed to control it. My king. A council member hesitated carefully. The servant has arrived. Silence settled across the chamber. The king leaned back slowly against his throne. Send her in. The doors opened. Lira entered carrying a silver tray lined with dark wine glasses. Instantly, she felt it. The room's atmosphere. Heavy. 20 pairs of noble eyes shifted toward her at once. Some annoyed, some curious, some openly hostile. Because servants were not meant to interrupt royal councils, especially not repeatedly. Lira kept her head lowered as she crossed the chamber carefully. Do not shake. Real. Lira lowered her gaze quickly. "I don't understand, Your Majesty." "Lie." And for the first time, the king almost enjoyed hearing one from her, because now he knew something important. The servant girl feared him, but not for the reasons everyone else did. And whatever truth she was hiding, it was powerful enough to terrify even her. The palace began changing around them, quietly at first, then all at once, because power did not need announcements to reshape the world. Sometimes, all it took was where a king chose to look. For weeks, the royal court had watched the situation unfold with growing discomfort. The servant girl remained near the king. Not constantly, not intimately, but enough. Enough to disturb people. Enough to start conversations that immediately lowered into whispers whenever footsteps approached. Because everyone noticed the pattern now. She served his private meetings, prepared his chambers, delivered documents personally sealed by royal command. And most unsettling of all, the king never sent her away. Not once. A man who dismissed nobles with a sentence, who exiled ministers over minor dishonesty, who once had an entire guard division replaced because one soldier hesitated during orders, kept allowing a servant girl near him. No punishment, no cruelty, no visible reason. The uncertainty became unbearable, especially for the nobles, because royal attention was currency, and somehow, a girl without status had become wealthy in the one thing none of them could buy: his interest. Lira felt the hostility growing long before anyone confronted her directly. The palace air itself had changed. Servants stopped speaking freely around her. Noblewomen stared too long during gatherings. Royal advisors suddenly memorized her movements. Even the guards watched her differently now. Not like a servant, like a question. And questions inside royal courts were dangerous things. One afternoon, while arranging documents inside the Western Library, Lira made a mistake. A tiny one, barely noticeable. But the king noticed immediately. She paused in front of an ancient shelf near the northern wall. Her fingers brushed across a faded royal crest carved into black wood. And for a moment, she froze. Not casually, not curiously. Recognition. The king saw it from across the room instantly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've seen that symbol before." The words struck her like ice water. Lira stepped back immediately. "No, Your Majesty." "Lie." Again. But this time, a dangerous one, because the crest belonged to a bloodline erased from kingdom history nearly 20 years earlier. A fallen royal house destroyed during civil war. Officially, no surviving members remained alive. The king rose slowly from his chair, every movement deliberate. "You touched it like memory." Her heartbeat thundered painfully now. "Careful. Too many mistakes already." "I only thought it looked familiar." Another pause. Then softly, "My mother used to sew similar patterns." The lie came smoother this time. Practiced. Prepared. But something inside the king sharpened instantly. Because for the first time, he realized her secrets might be larger than he imagined. And somehow, that didn't push him away. It pulled him closer. That night, the Alpha King stood alone in his war chamber long after midnight. Rain hammered against towering windows while torchlight flickered across old maps stained with years of conquest. But his attention remained fixed on something far older than war. Memory. A little girl standing in snowfall, golden firelight at a distant noble estate before its destruction. And eyes. Her eyes. Impossible. No. It couldn't be. That family had died years ago. He had seen the aftermath himself. Yet the more he looked at Lira, the more fragments returned. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to disturb him. Enough to make him restless. And the most dangerous part, for the first time in years, he wanted answers, more than control. Meanwhile, the court's patience finally shattered. The tension erupted during the winter moon gathering, the largest royal event of the season. Nobles from surrounding territories filled the grand ballroom beneath oceans of candlelight while musicians played soft orchestral hymns across polished marble halls. Luxury everywhere. Gold, jewels, political smiles hiding sharpened teeth. And at the center of it all, the king, dressed entirely in black as always. Untouchable. Cold. But tonight, the court watched him differently, because they were waiting for something. Watching for her. And eventually, she appeared, Lira entered quietly carrying silver wine pitchers beside several other servants. Simple uniform, lowered gaze, invisible by every palace standard. Except now. Nothing about her felt invisible anymore. Not after the king's attention. The room subtly shifted as whispers spread. There she is. She's prettier than I expected. No wonder he watches her. Disgust, jealousy, curiosity. Lira felt every stare like needles against her skin. Still, she continued working silently. Head lowered, hands steady. Survive the evening, remain unnoticed, leave quickly. That was the plan. Until Lady Vivian approached. Vivian of House Dareth, one of the wealthiest noblewomen in the kingdom. Beautiful, cruel, accustomed to admiration, and humiliated 3 times already by the king's rejection. She stopped directly in Lira's path. The music continued around them, but nearby conversations slowly quieted, because everyone sensed danger instantly. Vivian smiled first. A terrible sign. You. Lira bowed politely. My lady. Vivian's gaze swept across her servant uniform with open disgust. It's fascinating what entertains the king these days. Several nearby nobles chuckled softly. Lira remained silent. Good. Smart girl. But Vivian stepped closer. You should be careful. Her voice lowered sweetly. Creatures who forget their place inside royal courts rarely survive long. The insult landed exactly as intended. Publicly. Cruelly. Around them, nobles watched eagerly now, waiting. Because this was the natural order restoring itself. A servant humiliated a noble vict. Rias. That was how the kingdom worked. Vivian lifted Lira's chin, suddenly with her fan. Tell me, she whispered loudly enough for others to hear, what does a king possibly see in someone like you? The ballroom quieted. Not fully, but enough. Enough for silence to spread outward in waves. Lira's pulse hammered painfully. Do not react. Do not speak. Do not make this worse. She lowered her eyes again, carefully. I apologize if I offended you, my lady. Submission. Perfect submission. And somehow, that irritated Vivian even more. You offended me by breathing the same air as nobility. Laughter echoed nearby. Cruel laughter. The kind wealthy people used when they forgot servants were human. Vivian stepped back dramatically. Perhaps His Majesty enjoys rescuing strays now. More laughter. Then, a goblet shattered. The sound exploded through the ballroom. Instant silence. Every head turned instantly toward the throne. The king stood motionless beside the shattered silver cup at his feet. No expression, which made him even more terrifying. The entire ballroom froze, because everyone understood one thing immediately. Someone had crossed a line. The question was, who? Vivian paled slightly but recovered quickly enough to bow. Your Majesty, we were only amusing ourselves. The king descended the throne steps slowly, one at a time, measured, controlled. The room felt colder with each step. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. He stopped directly in front of Vivian, towering over her. And for the first time that evening, he spoke. Repeat what you said. The noblewoman's confidence cracked instantly. My king, I meant no disrespect. Repeat it. The command sliced through the ballroom. Vivian swallowed hard. Behind her composed expression, fear finally surfaced. Because now she understood. The danger was not the servant girl. The danger was him. I only suggested, she faltered, that perhaps the servant had forgotten her place. Silence. The king looked at her for several long seconds. Then finally, and what is her place? Nobody understood the question. Least of all Vivian. My king. The king's eyes darkened slightly. You speak as though you decide the worth of people beneath you. Another slow step closer. But you misunderstand something important. The ballroom had gone completely silent now. Even the musicians stopped playing. The king's voice remained calm, which somehow made every word more brutal. If I choose to notice someone, a pause, then they are no longer beneath anyone. The sentence struck the ballroom like lightning. Shock spread visibly across noble faces. Because he had done the impossible. He had publicly elevated a servant above noble insult. Not officially, not politically. Something worse. Personally. Vivian's face drained of color, and before she could recover, the king looked toward the royal guards. House Dareth will lose Eastern trade privileges for 3 months. Gasps erupted instantly. The punishment was catastrophic, financially humiliating, politically devastating. Vivian stared at him in horror. My king! You embarrassed yourself tonight. Cold, final. Then, without another glance at the noblewoman, the Alpha King turned toward Lira, and for one suspended moment, the entire kingdom watched him look at her differently. Not as a servant, not as entertainment, not as property, something else, something far more dangerous. Chosen. The realization spread through the ballroom slowly, then all at once, and suddenly, everyone understood why the palace had begun changing around her. Because the coldest king in the kingdom had finally found someone he refused to treat like everyone else. And that kind of attention could destroy empires. After the winter moon gathering, nothing remained normal. Not for the court, not for the servants, and certainly not for them. Because once a king publicly protects someone, the entire kingdom recalculates itself around that choice. The nobles became cautious, the servants became terrified, and Lira became trapped. Not physically, worse, socially, politically, emotionally. Every corridor now carried whispers behind her back. Every noble gaze lingered too long. Every servant either feared her or envied her. But the cruelest part, the king himself became impossible to avoid. 3 days after the banquet, snowstorms descended across the northern territories. Violent, relentless. The palace courtyards vanished beneath white frost while icy winds screamed against stone towers through the night. And somewhere beyond the kingdom walls, a border uprising began. Messengers arrived breathless before dawn. Military advisors flooded the war chambers. Royal guards doubled across the capital. The Alpha King prepared for war with terrifying efficiency. No hesitation, no panic. Only control. That was who he was. A man forged through conflict until battle became more natural to him than peace. And yet, even during military briefings, his attention kept drifting toward her. You're distracted. The voice came from General Varric during council discussions. The room instantly went silent. Nobody accused the king of distraction. Nobody survived long enough to repeat it. But Varric had served beside him for nearly 15 years. One of the few men still allowed honesty. The king's expression remained unreadable. Continue your report. Varric studied him carefully for a moment. Then, the servant girl is becoming a problem. There it was, finally spoken aloud. The council chamber tightened immediately. Several nobles avoided eye contact altogether. Because everyone had noticed it now. The king's jaw hardened slightly. Explain. The court believes she influences you. A pause. The nobles are becoming reckless. Another pause. And men become dangerous when they believe a servant has power they cannot control. Silence. Cold silence. The king leaned back slowly against his throne. Then perhaps the nobles should learn restraint. Varric exhaled quietly. You've never defended anyone before. That sentence lingered heavily between them. Because it was true. The Alpha King did not protect people. He protected kingdoms, territories, power, not individuals. Never individuals. And certainly not servants. The king's gaze darkened. Yet he offered no denial, which somehow disturbed the room more. That evening, Lira was summoned again. Not to the throne room. Not to the royal chambers. Somewhere worse. The private training hall. The massive chamber stood deep beneath the western towers where royal soldiers trained far from noble eyes. Torchlight flickered against black stone walls, scarred by blades and years of violence. Weapons lined the room like memories of war. Steel, blood, power. And at the center of it all stood the king, alone. His black training armor glistened faintly beneath firelight while sweat darkened the collar of his tunic. A sword rested casually in one hand. Even exhausted, he looked dangerous. No, especially exhausted. Lira hesitated near the entrance. You summoned me, your majesty. The king turned slowly toward her. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension between them had changed recently. Before it was fear, confusion, curiosity. Now, something heavier, something neither of them wanted to name. Come closer. Her pulse tightened immediately. Still, she obeyed, step by careful step. The doors shut behind her with a deep echo that suddenly made the training hall feel far too isolated, too private. The king studied her quietly. Then finally, "Why didn't you defend yourself?" Lira blinked. "My king." At the banquet, his voice remained calm. "Vivian insulted you repeatedly." A pause. "You accepted it." Lira lowered her eyes carefully. "She's nobility." And the single word carried unexpected sharpness. She looked up slightly, startled. The king stepped closer. "You allow people to wound you too easily." Something inside her shifted instantly. Because he sounded angry, not at her, for her. And somehow, that frightened her more. "It's not my place to fight nobles," she answered softly. The king's expression darkened. "Your place." Another step closer. The air tightened. "You speak about yourself like you belong beneath everyone." Lira swallowed carefully. "Because I do." "No." The response came instantly. Too instantly. The king seemed to realize it at the same moment she did. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Lira stared at him now with visible confusion. Because for weeks, she had been asking herself the same impossible question as everyone else. Why? Why her? Why this attention? Why this protectiveness? Why this obsession growing behind his eyes every time he looked at her? And finally, the fear inside her broke. "You need to stop." The words escaped before she could control them. The king went still. "What?" Lira's breathing trembled now. "This." She gestured weakly between them. "The watching. The summoning. The way everyone looks at me now." Emotion cracked softly through her voice. "I don't understand what you want from me." The king's jaw tightened. Neither did he. That was the problem. "I want the truth." Dangerous words. Lira stepped back instinctively. "You don't." "I do." "You only think you do." The king's eyes sharpened instantly. There. Again. That hidden fear. That buried history clawing beneath her calm exterior. He moved toward her suddenly. Fast. Lira startled as her back hit one of the stone pillars behind her. The king stopped directly in front of her. "Too close. Far too close." "You know something," he said quietly. The intensity in his voice sent chills through her entire body. "Every time I get near you." Another step. "You panic like someone waiting to be recognized." Her breath caught painfully. "Stop. Please stop." Because if he kept looking at her like that, he would eventually see everything. The king braced one hand against the pillar beside her head, caging her in without touching her. Yet somehow, the absence of contact felt even more dangerous. Torchlight flickered across his face now, softening nothing. He still looked like war wrapped in human skin. But beneath the control, something was unraveling. "You remember me." The words landed between them like thunder. Lira froze completely, and in that instant, confirmation flashed through his eyes. There it is. The truth. Small, terrified, real. The king's breathing slowed. Not from calmness. From realization. Impossible realization. "You were there," he whispered. Fragments collided violently inside his mind now. Snowfall, fired at a child hidden beneath royal banners, golden eyes staring up at him through smoke. "No. No." His hand tightened slightly against the pillar. "Lira!" For the first time, he said her name softly. Not like a ruler. Like a memory. And something inside her finally shattered. "You should have left me alone." The pain in her voice hit harder than accusation ever could. The king stared at her, close enough now to feel her trembling breaths, close enough to see tears gathering despite how desperately she fought them. And suddenly, his control slipped, just slightly, enough to become dangerous. "Do you think I would have protected you if I knew who you were?" The question came rougher than intended, raw, emotional, real. Lira looked up at him slowly, and there it was, the answer hidden beneath everything. "You already are." Silence. The world seemed to stop breathing. Neither moved. Neither looked away. The distance between them disappeared inch by inch beneath tension, so unbearable it almost became physical pain. The king's gaze dropped briefly to her lips. Lira noticed. Her breath faltered, and for one impossible moment, everything else vanished. The kingdom, the war, the palace, the rules. Just him. Just her. One breath apart from disaster. The king slowly lifted his hand. A violent knock exploded against the chamber doors. "Your Majesty!" The sound shattered the moment instantly. Both of them stepped apart like waking from something dangerous. The doors burst open. A royal guard entered breathlessly. The northern gates have been breached. Silence crashed over the room. Reality returned all at once. War. Politics. The kingdom. The king's expression hardened immediately, every trace of emotion disappearing behind armor once more. But not before Lira saw it. That single unguarded moment. The moment he almost crossed the line. And somehow, that terrified her more than his cruelty ever had. The kingdom changed after the northern gates fell. Not dramatically. Not immediately. That was the terrifying part. Disaster inside royal empires rarely arrived like thunder. It arrived quietly. In sealed letters that I end midnight meetings, that I end the silence between political smiles. And over the following days, the palace became a living thing holding its breath. Snow buried the capital beneath endless white, while soldiers flooded the courtyards day and night. Messengers rode through storms without rest. Royal blacksmiths worked until their hands bled. Nobles gathered in shadowed chambers whispering about rebellion, alliances, and war. Fear returned to the kingdom. Not fear of enemies, fear of instability. Because people could survive cruel rulers. What terrified them was uncertainty. And their king was becoming uncertain. The Alpha King had always been predictable in one way. Cold, controlled, untouchable. But now he disappeared from meetings without warning. Now he lost focus during military strategy discussions. Now his temper turned violent over small mistakes. A servant dropped ink near royal documents. 3 guards were dismissed. A general questioned border timing. The king shattered a goblet against the wall. The court watched carefully, because something was happening to him. Something dangerous. And the most terrifying part, everyone knew exactly when it had started. The servant girl. Meanwhile, Lira avoided him completely. Or at least, she tried. After the training hall, after that almost moment, something inside her had changed. Because before, she feared the king. Now, she feared herself. Feared the way her pulse reacted whenever he entered a room. Feared the memory of his voice, saying her name softly. Feared how close she had come to forgetting who he truly was. A king. The king. The man tied directly to the destruction of everything she once had. And worst of all, she feared the possibility that his feelings were real. Because if they were, everything became impossible. 3 nights later, the royal court gathered for an emergency summit. Every major noble house attended. Military leaders lined the throne chamber walls. Political tension suffocated the room before anyone even spoke. Lira stood near the rear servant corridor pouring wine with lowered eyes. Invisible again, or at least pretending to be. But she felt him notice her immediately. Even across the throne room. The awareness between them had become unbearable now. Silent, constant, dangerous. The king sat motionless upon the throne while ministers argued below him. The northern rebellion grows stronger daily. We need allied troops. Then secure them. That requires marriage alliances. Silence. The final words echoed heavily through the chamber. Marriage. Every noble in the room watched the king carefully now. Because this argument had existed for years. The kingdom needed an heir, needed political unity, needed a queen powerful enough to stabilize surrounding territories. But the king always refused. Always. Until now. An older council lord stepped forward carefully. My king. House Valen has renewed their offer. The room stilled instantly. Even Lira's hands tightened slightly around the silver pitcher. House Valen, the most powerful noble family in the eastern kingdoms. Their daughter, Lady Seraphine. Beautiful, strategic, dangerously influential. A perfect political match. The king's expression remained unreadable. No. Relief flickered through Lira before she could stop it. Then, General Varric spoke quietly. The rebellion has already spread beyond the northern border. A pause. If civil war begins again. That word mattered. Because everyone in that room remembered the last civil war. The blood, the executions, the burned noble houses. The king's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Varric continued carefully. The council believes marriage would stabilize the kingdom. The silence stretched, heavy, endless, and for the first time in years, the Alpha King hesitated. Lira felt it instantly. That hesitation, small, almost invisible, yet it hit her harder than any spoken answer. Because suddenly, this stopped being about emotions, stopped being about tension between them. This was reality. A king did not belong to himself. Kings belonged to kingdoms. Then the chamber doors opened. Lady Seraphine entered, and the room changed. She moved with the effortless confidence of someone raised around power her entire life. Silver gown, diamond-lined gloves, beauty sharpened into precision. But unlike the other noble women, she did not look intimidated by the king. She looked prepared. Seraphine bowed elegantly before the throne. "My king!" The Alpha King regarded her silently. Lira lowered her eyes immediately. She shouldn't care. This should mean nothing. Yet suddenly, she couldn't breathe properly, because Seraphine looked like she belonged beside him. Royal, composed, untouchable. Not like a servant pretending she could survive near a throne. The council watched eagerly now, hope spreading visibly through the room. Finally the king might yield. Seraphine stepped closer. "The Eastern Territories stand ready to support your reign fully." Her voice remained smooth, measured. But uncertain kingdoms require certainty in return. Political language. Marriage language. The king's expression hardened slightly. Still, he said nothing. And that silence terrified Lira more than rejection would have. Because for the first time, he wasn't refusing. Then everything shattered. A royal guard burst into the chamber. "Kneel!" The command exploded through the room. Instant chaos followed. Steel rang from scabbards. Guards rushed forward. Nobles recoiled in confusion. Lira barely had time to react before soldiers grabbed her arms violently. The silver wine pitcher crashed against marble floors. "What?" "By order of the Royal Council, this servant stands accused of treason." The room erupted instantly. Lira froze in complete shock. No. A guard ripped a folded parchment from his belt and raised it high. "We discovered correspondence hidden within the servant quarters." Another guard slammed several sealed letters onto the floor before the throne. Letters marked with the crest of a fallen royal bloodline. Her bloodline. The room went deathly silent. Lira's face drained completely of color. Impossible. She burned those years ago. "How interesting," Seraphine murmured softly. The king rose slowly from the throne. Every guard immediately stiffened. "What is this?" The question sounded calm. Too calm, which made it terrifying. The council lord stepped forward nervously. "My king, we believe the servant is not who she claims to be." Another letter unfolded. Ancient royal markings glimmered beneath torchlight. Gasps spread across the chamber. Because suddenly, the truth became visible. Not a servant, a survivor. The last living heir of the bloodline destroyed during the Civil War. The same bloodline once accused of treason against the crown. Lira's breathing turned shallow. Panic crashed through her violently now. Because this was how it ended. Not romance, not protection. Execution. The guards forced her to her knees before the throne. And for the first time since entering the palace, she looked truly terrified. Not of humiliation. Death. The council members erupted into furious whispers. She deceived the crown. She infiltrated the palace. She must be imprisoned immediately. Treason. The accusations blurred together like knives. Lira looked upward instinctively. Toward him. Toward the king. And what she saw there broke something inside her. Because he looked shaken. Actually shaken. For the first time since she met him, his control cracked visibly. The Alpha King stared at the royal crest with something dangerously close to emotion in his eyes. Not rage. Not triumph. Pain. Real pain. As though the truth hurt him too. And suddenly, Lira understood something horrifying. He truly hadn't known. The realization made everything worse. Because now she saw the fracture spreading through him in real time. Duty. Power. Emotion. Colliding violently behind his eyes. "My king," Varric said carefully, "you must give the order." Silence. The entire throne room waited. The kingdom itself seemed to pause. Lira stared at him with trembling breath. Please, please don't make me believe any of it was real. The king's jaw tightened. His hands clenched slowly at his sides. Every instinct inside him screamed to protect her. And for the first time in his life, he hated himself for it, because now the kingdom was watching. The nobles, the guards, the council, all waiting to see whether their ruthless king would choose the crown, or the girl beneath it. Lira looked at him one final time, and in her eyes, he saw the answer already forming. She thought he would betray her. No. Worse. She thought he had always intended to. The distance between them suddenly felt enormous. Bigger than kingdoms, bigger than war. And when the king finally spoke, his voice sounded colder than death itself. Take her to the lower cells. The words shattered the room. Lira stopped breathing. For one unbearable second, their eyes locked across the throne chamber, and the pain inside his expression almost betrayed him completely. But it was too late. The guards dragged her away. She didn't fight, didn't scream, which somehow made it worse, because as she disappeared beyond the palace doors, she never looked back at him again. And standing alone before the entire kingdom, the Alpha King realized something terrifying. He had just protected his throne by destroying the only person who ever made him feel human.